Hello, welcome to the Intel with Greg Cosell. I'm Geoff Mosher alongside Adam Caplan, and joining us, as always, is Greg Cosell. And Greg, this will be our last NFL preview show with you before the big event, the NFL Draft, which is going to be that Thursday night. And we've got Thursday, Friday, Saturday, day 1, day 2, day 3. It's going to be really exciting, and I'm happy that you're going to be a part of our draft coverage, and I'm sure our listeners and viewers are excited as well. In this episode, we're going to finish off talking about wide receivers, and we're also going to get into a few prospects who we were not able to get into along the way so far. So interesting wide receiver class, Greg. It seems like everybody does a little bit different. You know, you got guys who are big, you got guys who are maybe slot guys and speed guys and power guys, but we'll start with a really interesting prospect out of TCU because of his size, right? Quentin Johnson, such a big guy, physical guy. What do you see on tape when you look at Quentin Johnson?
Yeah, just as a quick aside, Geoff, before we start with Johnston, I thought watching this group of wide receivers, and I've seen a lot of them, and I also had some good conversations with wide receiver coaches, the feeling going into the draft, and of course it doesn't play out this way when you get to the league, but the feeling going into the draft is there's not really an alpha dog receiver in this draft class. You know, one of those guys that there's not a Jamar Chase per se, where everybody knew Jamar Chase was going to be a big time NFL wideout. So we know that there's going to be a couple of guys that turn out to be really, really good players because it turns out that way. But I think, as I said, the feeling watching the tape and speaking to people who study in even greater detail than I do and do it for a living because they coach them, that there's not that one guy. You know, but we'll get to a couple of guys that I think could fall into that category, but I'm not sure Quentin Johnston is one of them. You know, he's 6'3", 208. He didn't run as well as I think people hoped he would, and probably he hoped he would. But because he's 6'3", he has stride length, and stride length is a trait. I learned that the hard way many years ago. I think he's best as a movement route runner, meaning vertical routes, post routes, over routes, shallow and intermediate crossers, where his stride length and play speed could generate separation. That's really what he is. He's not a sort of, you know, throttle down and separate on those kinds of routes. So to me, it's the size, it's the stride length, and the play speed, not the 40 times speed, but the play speed, which also is a function of stride length. The question is, can he develop into a complete receiver who can be a factor at all three levels on a consistent basis? He needs to become more consistent catching the ball. There's too many drops littered throughout his tape. He needs to become a more refined and nuanced route runner. So to me, the question with Johnston is, what can he be down the road? You know, is he a complementary type guy, or can he become that big time number one? You know, keep in mind, you know, someone like Justin Jefferson, and I know for Eagles fans that probably brings up bad memories, but no one had Justin Jefferson as a top 5 or top 10 pick in the draft. Maybe one person did, but you never know how guys will develop. So the question is, what can he become?
The way you described him. Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Would you say on that, what he could become? A, do you see him as a true X? Is that really where you see him, he's going to line up? And when you look at this group, talking to coaches, there are not a lot of big receivers for this draft.
No,
Greg. So how do you see him lining up the next level?
And it's funny you say that, and that means a guy like Johnston and the few others that are big could end up getting drafted maybe higher than a team has them on their board, because if they're looking at a 5'9" guy versus a 6'3" guy, depending on what your team needs are, you may feel that, hey, a 6'3" guy can be an X in this league. Rarely are 5'9" guys X receivers. You know, obviously there's so much formation variation. Guys line up all over formations. We know that. But if you're just starting out OTAs day one and you say, okay, this is the positions of our guys, because don't forget, you have to learn a position. You know, people forget that. Guy comes in the league from college football, particularly someone like Quentin Johnston, who played in what was essentially a spread type offense. He has to learn positions. Adam, how many times have you talked to coaches and they say, we love the kid because he can play all the positions? You know, Geoff, you've heard the same thing.
Yep.
You know, if a guy can't do that, And I don't know whether Johnston can or not. So this is no knock on Johnston, but the point is you have to learn a position first. No one comes in with a coach saying, okay, we're going to starting day one, line you up everywhere, because they have to learn a position. And then you see how they handle that and assimilate into your offense, and then you decide what's next. But in answer to your question, Adam, can he be an X? His size would indicate such, but boundary X receivers in the NFL have to be able to win one-on-one. They have to, because when you're on the backside of trips, you're going to get one-on-one coverage. And obviously size matters there, but he's not a refined, nuanced route runner. So that's something he's going to need to work on.
How would you compare this when you were saying how he was used? I thought of a certain receiver, except the certain receiver I'm thinking of had excellent hands, but similar maybe usage the way you said with Alshon Jeffrey as kind of a backside, sort of X who thrives off the dig and the slant,
and as it's an interesting comparison, because Jeffrey, before he got to the Eagles in Chicago, actually was a vertical receiver. I mean, if you look at a couple of those years there in Chicago, he caught deep balls, and not because he had 4.3 speed. You know, he was big. Oh, it's funny. He was not as big when you'd watch him in South Carolina. They'd always say, "Oh, this kid's 6'5", you know," and then he got to the combine, he was like 6'2 3/4", which is still very big. But Johnston, could he become that guy? Theoretically, yes. Jeffrey in his years with the Eagles was obviously a very solid receiver, and he fit what the Eagles needed, but you wouldn't call him a dominant receiver. It wasn't as if he was catching 90 balls.
Right.
He was catching what, Geoff, you'd remember better than I, maybe 56, 60 balls.
Yeah, 50 to 60
tops. Those couple of years there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's something there with Johnston, and he will clearly, great example, he will clearly be in the eye of the beholder. It's very possible that some teams could have him in the top 10. But don't forget, you have to draft in this draft. So you can compare him to whoever you want, but in this draft, some teams could easily have him in the top 10.
Sure. And like Adam mentioned, he might really be the only kind of big physical presence with who's got first or second round material to him like that.
Well, I think there's another guy, but we'll get to that.
Okay. One thing, Greg, before we move on, and the coaches we spoke with mentioned this, and you mentioned as well. I wanted to know, because we have rarely talked about this, because you told us about Christian Watson last year, and a lot of people we spoke to said the same thing, and he was better in the second half. He still got some issues with technique, but Johnston had drops, and there were some bad drops there. You as someone who evaluates tape, you worry at the next level that sometimes this will, like, coaches want to correct it, but sometimes it just doesn't stop.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a function of hand placement, believe it or not. No one thinks about that with receivers, but I've been fortunate to have some great conversations with some of the best receivers coaches in the NFL through the years. And I've been told by those guys who obviously know more about it than I do, that you can teach guys how to catch a football. If they don't place their hands properly, look, we had those conversations during the season with Jason Avant.
Just thinking about that.
Jason was phenomenal talking about that, showing us hand placement for, different kinds of balls. You can teach guys that. Christian Watson needed to be taught that, because when I watched his tape, I saw he did not place his hands properly, depending on the kind of throw it was. Johnston, I didn't notice that as much, but I don't want to sit here and say that that's not the case, but I didn't notice it as much. So then you get into whether a guy simply might not have great hands. Some guys just don't. We'll have to wait and see on that, because when you're a big receiver, okay, you may not always separate the way some other guys do, and you may be forced to catch balls where defenders are close. I mean, I'm not going to compare him to Michael Irvin, who's a great Hall of Famer, but Michael Irvin was not necessarily a separator the way you think of separators, but he caught everything with people near him. If you're not a great separator, you need to be able to do that.
All right, let us move on to someone who is probably, in your mind, I'm going to say a little bit better of a separator, and that's Ohio State's Jaxon Smith-Njigba.
Yeah,
he was a brother who plays in the Pirates, Pittsburgh Pirates farm chain. I remember watching a few Pirates spring training games and seeing someone whose last name was Jaxon or Smith-Njigba. So I'm going to guess that they're very related.
he wasn't the guy I was talking about when I said I think there's someone else, but I
Right.
really like his tape a lot. Obviously, he didn't play in 2022 hardly at all, but I watched all his 2021 tape, and I really like this kid. And he's almost 6'1", okay, and he was 196 pounds. His three cone and short shuttle were ridiculous. I mean, like just absolutely ridiculous. This guy, to use a term that I heard from someone, I think last year, and I love it, he is a separation generator. This guy is really quick in a short area. He knows how to run routes. Now, this guy is smooth, refined. He's got a natural feel for the pace and tempo of different routes. He's got the nuance to change speed within the route. He knows how to find voids in zone. He can win versus man. He's not a true vertical guy. You know, that's not his game. You know, can he run the slot fade? Yes, but he's not a true vertical receiver that you just line him up on the outside and say, just run by people. So because he's almost 6'1", and keep this in mind, in 2021 at Ohio State, 104 of his 113 targets came out of the slot. Very, very similar to what Justin Jefferson did at LSU in his last year at LSU. And as you guys recall, a lot of people had questions about whether he could line up outside in the NFL, which now, after a couple of years, seems silly, right? Because the guy is arguably the best receiver in the league, or certainly top 2, 3, depending on whatever list you want to make. So it now seems silly, but there were legitimate questions, as you guys recall, about Jefferson. Now, I'm not making this is not an apples to apples comparison. Okay. I don't want people to think I'm saying he's Justin Jefferson, but Smith-Njigba is not a little guy. He's 6 feet and 5/8 and 196. So even though he lined up almost exclusively in the slot at Ohio State, I believe because he's so refined as a route runner that he can line up outside as well. And I believe he will give you inside outside flexibility. And overall, I think he's a really good prospect.
Greg, there were two receivers that the coaches I spoke with, probably their favorite guys. Let's go to one of them. And that's Jordan Addison out of USC. What did the tape show you on this kid?
Yeah, Jordan Addison is a really interesting receiver because he's a little guy, but he plays bigger. And I'll explain that in a sec. He's 173 pounds, which obviously is not big. You know, you always wonder, though, when you see receivers who sort of, I don't want to say they're outliers, but they are, like Devonta Smith. If people then start to think, well, okay, if a guy's really good, and we've seen what Devonta Smith can do, can a guy, you know, who's somewhat similar in terms of his weight, you know, can he step in and be a really good player? Because, hey, we know Devonta Smith is a really good player. So what Addison did, which why I said he plays bigger than his size, is he really was aggressive, attacking the ball in the air. He made tough contested catches. He'd hold on to the ball when he got hit. He has really good body control. He's got really good hands. He's another guy who's a really good route runner. He knows how to use his vertical stem to attack and break down corners. And another guy that was really efficient separating at the top of his route stem. Now, I wouldn't call him a true vertical burner, but he understands leverage and how to win to create vertical separation. So I think he is a 3-level dimension and another guy that has inside-outside flexibility. And, you know, you can use him on screens. You can use him on jet reverses. I think he can be a multi-dimensional weapon in the context of an NFL offense.
How would you compare his tape from Pittsburgh when he played with Kenny Pickett and won the Blitnikoff to USC? Did he get better? Was he basically as good at USC as he was at Pitt? Anything different?
Well, the traits don't change. You know, obviously people look at the numbers. At Pitt, he had 100 catches in 2021, and he only had 59 at USC. So people think, oh, well, he's not as good. The traits don't change. There's probably many, many reasons for that. He was clearly the number one target at Pitt. He wasn't clearly the number one target at USC. They had other, you know, they had another player, Mario Williams, who came from Oklahoma, who was a big time recruit as well at Oklahoma. So they had other players as well. Whereas Pitt, he was kind of the guy. You know, I think he probably ran more vertical routes at Pitt than he did at USC. And that's probably why the numbers may have been better. But, you know, the traits are the same.
And Adam, who was the second one you said you wanted to ask?
Oh, yeah, this one, Marvin Mims out of Oklahoma. Greg, what do you think of him?
Yeah. Have you spoke? Do people seem to really like him, Adam?
Yes, a lot.
That's interesting because obviously he ran really well. Now he's 5'11", 183. Another guy that's not really big. His athletic testing measurables are really, really good. To me, he's a smooth, fluid, vertical receiver. Another guy you want on the move. The same kind of routes, different kind of receiver, but the similar kind of routes I spoke about with Quentin Johnston. Go routes, seam routes, over routes, crossers. Another guy who can line up inside or outside. I think he's mentally tough and competitive, working inside, even though he's only 183 pounds. And I think that's a real box that you really like to check with him. I think he has some toughness. He did that more in 20 and 21, different coaching staff. You didn't see it as much in 2022, but it's there. Now the question is, because he's only 183, does he lack that frame to work inside, or do you think of him? I don't think he's quite this level of receiver, but do you think of him like Jahan Dotson, who also wasn't a big man, but Geoff, as you well know, because of the Penn State connection, he was super competitive and tough inside. I don't think Mims is quite at that level. But when he has free access and can build up speed, he can run by people. And I think what you did not see on tape very much was him working against press. Now, that's an issue everybody brings up, and I think it's important. But I also think with the way NFL offenses are evolving, with more teams using motion, more teams using formation variation, you can alleviate and camouflage that if it's an issue. So you don't have Marvin Mims does not have to line up on the ball. He can line up off the ball. He can be in motion. He can be in different spots in the formation. So you can alleviate the issue if a guy is not great versus press. He's not going to be a boundary X very often. Does that mean he'll never line up there? No, but you're not drafting him and saying he's my boundary X.
I know, Greg, with Jahan, because you brought him up, there was not as many questions about his ability to win on the outside despite his size, because there was a lot of examples of contested catch and great athletic ability. When you watch Marvin Mims,
he's not quite that guy.
Okay, he doesn't have that kind of go up and get it type.
He's not quite that guy. No, he's not the same level of prospect as Dotson, and that's why Mims, even though people might like him, Adam, he's not going to be a first round pick.
Oh no, I'm just talking about. We're just talking about guys that the coaches like. Yeah, no one's talking about him as a first round.
No, I mean, you want, like I said, he likely projects, if you're going to put him in the categories people put him in, he likely projects as a Z or a slot off the ball movement where he can maximize his accelerating speed. Now this year he caught a lot of long touchdowns on busts. So it was very interesting watching the tape where guys just busted and he ran free and he caught 60-yard touchdowns, which obviously made his numbers look great. But he's an interesting guy, but I don't know. The question is, can a guy like that become more than a true vertical dimension? In other words, think of Will Fuller, who, by the way, was the 20th pick in the draft. But, can Marvin Mims eventually become more than that? And that's the question when you draft him. How do you see him down the road?
I feel like when we talk about our next receiver, it's sort of the same conversation. A guy who's very good athletic traits, but size may dictate whether or not he can play fully on the outside or inside. That's Boston College's Zay Flowers, Greg. I mean, do you see a guy who's, I think he's what, 5'8"?
He's 5'9" and a quarter.
5'9", right. Not the smallest guy in the world, but certainly, not 6 feet either. So
yeah, but this guy's a little more of an alpha dog receiver, Geoff. And I had some great conversations on the field at the combine with the coaches who were down on the field, with the wide receivers, the NFL coaches. They said this guy is a big time alpha dog, which I think the tape shows. I think he's more, like, to me, he's a more complete receiver than Marvin Mims. And I think that will be reflected in where he's drafted. I think Zay Flowers could easily be a later first round pick. And I don't know what you found out, Adam, talking to people, but I think that, to me, this guy is late first round, definitely top 40. That's the way
I would say. Yeah, I would say Greg as early as middle of the first round. No, look, depending on which coach you talk to or personnel guy, I'm not saying anyone would have him over Smith-Njigba, but he could be the second receiver taken. In fact, he probably will be.
Yeah. Now, it's funny. I mean, you guys know how I do my work. I actually watched Flowers very early in the process because I had watched Flowers' 2020 tape and his 2021 tape because I kept thinking he would come out, and he didn't. So I had a really good baseline for Flowers. So because I had that baseline, I watched him. I think I watched him even before the Super Bowl, because the way my work schedule is, we finish our Super Bowl show and I've got like a week before I go to the Super Bowl and I start watching some guys. I watched him then. So this was well before the combine, and I loved his tape. And, it's funny because I was sitting watching with my intern, and I said to him after we finished watching, like I said, before the Super Bowl, I don't look at the list right now. I don't follow that at this, at that point. I said, this guy is going to be a top 40 pick for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, like 2-3 weeks later, I start to see everybody, oh, Zay Flowers is, he's a good prospect. And I was saying to myself, well, no, you know what? Yeah, because I watched his tape, but I really like him. To me, because he is a 3-level dimension for sure, Geoff, and he's outstanding run after catch. Think of Flowers. I'm not saying these teams will draft him because they may not, one team doesn't really need receivers, but think of him like in the Chiefs or Dolphins offense. I mean, this guy can line up anywhere. He's vertical. He's run after catch. He can run away from people. He can separate. He can defeat press. He's got accelerating speed. You can run the jet sweep stuff with him. You want to get this guy the ball when he's on the move, because he is, and his body type is different. He's a little stouter body type. Like someone like Mims is thin looking. This guy has a thicker body type. So I really like Zay Flowers' tape all 3 years that I watched him.
Well, nice. Sounds like a guy who has the opportunity to also to hit that. I would call it the golden zone for wide receivers who are good, and Jefferson's a great example. They fall to the bottom of the first round, which means they go to a team that actually has a pretty decent quarterback.
Yep.
And it gives them a chance to get acclimated pretty quickly and succeed.
And like I told you, 2 wide receivers coaches in the league told me that he was the leader of the pack in the room. So he's got that mentality.
Right.
In fact, if Quentin Johnson gets drafted ahead of Flowers, it's strictly because of size. Like you're not. He's
not as good a receiver based on tape.
Right.
100% right, Adam.
And there's a saying in scouting: you scout the tape, scout the player, not the jersey or the size. Just go by what the talent shows you. This kid is really, really good. Now, here's one follow-up before we move on here. Do you see him as a Z, a slot, or could he play actually on the outside a lot?
I think he can be an inside, outside, flexible guy for sure. Because, he'll, obviously you didn't see many reps versus press, but I think he can do that. And I guarantee he'll have a plan. He strikes me as that kind of guy. He'll have a plan. But, I think that you're going to start off with him being more of a movement guy, Z slot for sure. But I think ultimately he can do a lot of things for you.
Gotcha.
All right, Greg, let's move on. The next guy might have been the one you were referring to as another big physical presence, not named Quentin Johnson. He went to Tennessee. His name is Cedric Tillman, 6'3", 213 pounds. Is this maybe the person you were referring to?
He wasn't the guy I was referring to, but I like him more than I like Johnston.
Okay.
Now, he didn't play a ton this year. He still had 30 catches, but he fought through an injury all year. And I watched all his 2021 targets when he had a great year. And I thought that, to me, I mean, this guy is 6'3" 3/8", 213, okay? And to me, he's got the look and feel of an NFL receiver. He's got size, stride length, physicality, competitiveness. He played big and fast and powerful. Don't forget, in that offense, he's going to line up outside the numbers. That's an offense, that's pure air raid with the really wide splits. So, I mean, he's spent almost all of his career lining up outside the numbers. But at 6'3", 3/8", 213, that's okay. That's kind of what he is. He can be a boundary X without a question. He's got high-level physicality. He's got competitiveness. He's got body control. He's got strong hands. He's got really good hand-eye coordination. He can make tough contested catches. He can, in the SEC in 2021, he got on top of corners. I really like him. I mean, to me, there's similarities to someone like Mike Williams. I think that's a reasonable comparison. Mike Williams is obviously big, physical, and has vertical ability. And I think Cedric Tillman kind of falls into that category. He has many of the measurables coming out. I went back and looked at Williams' athletic testing measurables when he came out of Clemson, and he and Tillman are very, very similar in the athletic testing measurables.
Interesting. Let's stay, Greg, same team, Jalin Hyatt, who coaches love watching him run. What's the tape show you?
Yeah, another guy, same school. So again, you're dealing with a guy that lined up almost exclusively outside the numbers, very rarely pressed. Therefore, he almost always had free access. Great straight line speed. I don't care what the 40 times showed. The tape tells you that he can run. He's a glider with explosive vertical acceleration. And because of that, he ran intermediate routes well because of the cushion that he was given, within the context of that offense. I thought he tracked the deep ball really, really well because he's a deep ball receiver. So you're dealing with an explosive vertical receiver that has short area burst and accelerating deep speed that always looks deceptive because there's such an easy gliding feel to his movement. He's the true definition of a vertical dimension. So the question is, can he be more than that? Because look, every team wants a vertical dimension because it changes the way defenses play. So that's always in demand. But then the question becomes, where do you draft a player like that? Because what you didn't see on tape, due to the nature of Tennessee's wide open spread passing game, you didn't see him work versus press. You really didn't see run after catch. See, run after catch is not catching the ball when you're wide open and there's no one in front of you, which he did a lot. That's not run after catch. Anybody could run after catch when that happens. You catch the ball and there's no one there. Run after catch is like when you think of an A.J. Brown, where you might catch a short ball and you have to either through strength, competitiveness, shiftiness, whatever the trait is you want, where you actually then have to beat people. Hyatt, people say he's great run after catch. Well, no, he's not great run after catch because when you catch the ball on the move and there's no one in front of you, that's not run after catch. So that's a question. Can he run after catch, or is he simply just a explosive vertical receiver? And that's a question teams will have to decide. Obviously they work him out and teams will work him out individually, which has all happened already. The three of us don't get to do that. So I can only tell you what's on the tape. And you didn't really see him versus press because of the nature of the offense, and you didn't really see run after catch.
Interesting. All right, Greg. There's a couple other receivers, but at this point, I'm just curious as to who the receiver you were referring to when you said that there was another big receiver that you liked more than Quentin Johnson.
You want to know who that is? You ready?
Yeah.
Yes. Waited for bated breath. Go ahead.
Jonathan Mingo.
Oh, Mingo. Okay.
Love Jonathan Mingo. Loved his tape. Another guy I watched early, knew nothing about him. Loved him, and then found out the same thing at the combine, that he's an alpha dog. 6'1 3/4, 220, really good athletic testing measurables. Did not have huge numbers because Ole Miss this year was a running football team. I think he's one of the most fascinating receiver prospects in this draft. Size, stride length, physical strength, competitiveness, can line up anywhere, but certainly it can be a boundary X because they ran the ball so much. This guy blocked, and he relished it. There's a physical presence to his game that really stands out. I really liked him. And, again, not an apples to apples comparison, but I thought watching him of an A.J. Brown, and keep in mind, A.J. Brown, until his last 6 games at Ole Miss in his last year, was purely a slot receiver. It's only in his last 6 games at Ole Miss that A.J. Brown went on the outside and played some boundary X. And we know that A.J. Brown in the NFL can line up anywhere. But I really like Jonathan Mingo. And, like I said, basically 6'2", 220, ran a 4.46.
That's impressive at 220, man. A 4.46.
He's good. He's built.
Oh, yeah.
22 reps on the bench press sort of illustrates your point that a lot of the receivers don't do bench press like that.
No, because they don't want to, lift it 3 times and stop. Yeah.
Right.
22's really good for a receiver, by the way.
And
really
his vertical jump and his broad were great. I mean, this guy's testing measurables were great.
Yeah.
So, again, I really like Jonathan Mingo. And I heard great things about him when I was at the combine. So, he's like, for instance, I would ultimately, I like Tillman and Mingo more than I like Johnston right now. Again, now it depends on team, eye of the beholder, many things. But I would say, just based on tape, I like Mingo and Tillman more.
So there's another sort of mid-round sleeper that coaches mentioned to me, and that's Tyler Scott of University of Cincinnati. Yep. What do you think of him?
Yeah, I watched him. I actually, I don't know if you know Dan Horde, who does the games.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Play-by-play.
Yeah, he does play-by-play for the Bengals, University of Cincinnati. And I remember talking to him, and he said, watch Tyler Scott. And I was going to anyway, but now he's another guy that plays much faster than what his 40 time was at the combine. This is another guy that has vertical speed and explosiveness, but again, 5'10", 177. I think there's a little bit more to this kid. He did the majority of his work at Cincinnati outside the numbers, which of course included the vertical routes where his pure speed consistently showed up, and he had free access, almost all the time. So the question is, because he didn't run a lot of routes, which to me normally is not a big factor, because that's true with a lot of college receivers that they don't run. To me, it's not a negative to say he didn't run a big route tree. Most college receivers don't. So he'll learn that in the NFL. And another guy, if you get the ball to him on the move, this guy is explosive. And I said, again, here's a guy I watched very early in the process, and I said in my mind, this guy's going to be a day 2 pick, because there are not many receivers with his speed and vertical ability. And again, you want the ball in his hands, so you're going to have the jet sweeps and the orbit reverses, the RPO game, all those things that allow a player like Scott to be a factor. Because how many times you see those quick slants in the RPO game where the receiver then has room to run after the catch? Scott can do that. And I think he had a touchdown or 2 this year where he caught quick slants and just took off, and people don't catch him.
All right, Greg, we can go through a million different receivers. There's always a million for the draft.
There's a million of them.
This is the point where I'll say to you, give me maybe a prospect or 2 whose tape jumped out at you. May not be a top 30 guy, but you might see, day 2, early day 3.
Right.
Anybody stand out there?
Oh, sure. I'm sure they did. Hold on. I need to look at a list, because
guys like Josh Downs, Trey Palmer.
I know Rashee Rice and Jaden Reed sort of.
Well, I'll tell you one guy that I really, really liked, and I know he's probably not being talked about, but that's, again, that's not relevant to me who's being talked about.
Yeah.
I really like Xavier Hutchinson from Iowa State.
Okay.
Now, he's a certain kind of receiver. But you could say that about a lot of guys, okay? Hutchinson is 6'2", 203. Actually ran pretty well. Measurables were pretty good. He's another guy. He catches everything. He's he's not a vertical receiver, so you have to push that aside, okay? He's got excellent size. He can line up inside or outside. He works short, intermediate. He's got a really refined, nuanced feel for route running. He's got great route quickness. He understands different routes, pace, and tempo. He's got a diversified release package to attack and defeat press. There's 2 guys who I got vibes of, watching Hutchinson. And again, vibes of these guys when they came out, because you have to, and I'm going to make this point in a sec. I got vibes of Michael Thomas and Keenan Allen. Now, keep this in mind. We have no idea who's going to draft Hutchinson. We have no idea, the other receivers on the team and how he will be deployed.
Mm-hmm.
But Thomas was a 2nd-round pick, and Keenan Allen was a 3rd-round pick. So, and Keenan Allen is a really good NFL receiver, but he's a certain kind of receiver. Right. No one's going to say Keenan Allen, man, he just runs by people. He's a certain kind of receiver. He's really good at that. We would agree with that. He's really good at what he is. To me, Xavier Hutchinson can be that kind of guy. He's going to be really good at what he is.
One question, Greg, on Trey Palmer. I know he
I watched him.
Okay, I know he transferred from LSU. I know he's very fast, but is he just kind of a raw guy that needs a lot of work? What did you see from him?
Yeah, let me pull my notes on him, because I watched him really early. He ran really, really well, which everybody knew he would, because he was a high school sprint champion in the 100-meter and 200 meters in the state of Louisiana, where they obviously produce a lot of athletes. So he had the great year, at Nebraska this year. He's a straight line, linear, vertical guy. There's not, a lot of track guys do not have loose hips. They're not necessarily sudden and twitchy. They're straight line. So he's a vertical guy, and he can run by and get on top of corners. Again, because they all have free access off the ball in college for the most part. You see that accelerating speed. He didn't face press. You didn't really see physicality to his game. You didn't see a lot of run after catch. So the question is, what is he at the next level? His tape in some ways raised more questions to me than it answered. And I'll give you an example of a guy like that, and you'll know exactly what I mean because he's in the same division as the Eagles. I thought of De'Ami Brown a lot watching his tape. Brown came out of North Carolina as a vertical guy. People weren't quite sure if he could be more than that. And up to this point, it hasn't quite worked. So,
yeah, interesting.
Palmer, certainly, he ran a 4.33 at the combine, and he certainly can run by people. There's no question about that. Is he more than that? I think that's the big, big question.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little, Greg. You are Greg Cosell, GM of the South Jersey Juggernauts. You have a great team, and you have a Tom Brady in his prime at quarterback. You just want a wide receiver, and you don't really care about what scheme you're running because you have such a great quarterback. You just want the best wide receiver
in this draft. You're talking about
draft. So who would you take?
I probably take if you really put me on the spot. I would probably take Smith-Njigba.
Smith-Njigba, yes. All right, good stuff. Yeah. I thought you might say Zay Flowers just because
he was. Those were the two guys. They were neck and neck.
Gotcha. All right, cool. Yeah. Let's get into some prospects from other positions that we didn't get a chance to ask you about. We wanted to go back to running back a little bit. Sean Tucker from Syracuse, Greg.
Yeah, I watched him.
Yeah. Do you like him?
Yeah, I don't dislike him. I mean, I don't think he's, he kind of reminded me of someone like Austin Eckler, that kind of back. He's a really good receiver. He's kind of a methodical power runner. He's got really good cutback vision. He's kind of a slasher. I think he's got pretty good juice to him. He does. I don't think he's a foundation back. I don't think he's a guy you draft and, okay, he's our guy. But foundation back is a relative term. Clearly, Austin Eckler is a foundation back for the Chargers, but he's not going to carry 270 times. In fact, I think he carries about anywhere between 190 and 210 times, and he's an outstanding receiver. I think that Tucker theoretically is that kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
So we must have got like 4 or 5 questions. Could he talk about Izzy Abanikanda of Pitt? We're going to ask him. How about Izzy?
Yeah, I've started watching him. Okay. And I need to do more work on him. So okay. I don't want this to come across like I'm all done because I'm not. What I've seen so far, I don't love what I've seen. And there's one thing that bothers me. Okay. And maybe it'll change as I watch more. But when he was starting to get tackled, like when he saw that, hey, maybe the run's not going to go much further, he would slow his feet and drop his head to prepare for contact. Mm. That I don't think you can run like that in the NFL, and be a high level runner. But like I said, I need to see more. I think he's a little tight hipped. I think he's probably fast in a straight line, but I think he's a little tight hipped. I'm not sure how shifty and elusive he is. Straight line speed to me for a running back is not anywhere near the top of my list for a trait, because how many times do you see running backs just run through a gap where no one's there as if they're running a 40-yard dash?
Right.
So, people can say, oh, well, he got up to 22. Or, to me, that doesn't mean a lot because that doesn't really happen in the NFL. So, I need to see more. But my initial thoughts were not, as positive as maybe I was hoping, but I will definitely need to see more. But I just was kind of bothered by the fact that he seemed to like slow his feet and drop his head. And I don't believe you can run like that in the NFL.
All right, let's switch sides and talk about some defensive players. There is a defensive tackle at Northwestern who has some buzz here. And Adam, can you help me with the pronunciation on the name?
I think we just go double A.
Double A?
His nickname is Tommy. Itomiwa Adebare. He is a interesting player, Greg. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. His 40 time at 4.49. I know
crazy.
Joe
Yeah.
Banner, the former Eagles president, said I guess he would tell his people, maybe it was with Cleveland, I don't care about the 40 time. I don't want to hear about it for a defensive lineman, but still, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a pretty good time.
So what did the tape tell you?
Yeah, I've started really, watching him in detail, and he's kind of an interesting guy. Now he played almost an equal number of snaps inside and outside. So keep that in mind that he played both inside and outside. I think he's ultimately an inside player in the league. That's the way I would see him. He's a fascinating mix of kind of athletic and physical traits. You know, he's got long arms, but he's beside the arm length, he's kind of a bit undersized and probably lacks the overall length you ideally want in an edge player. But he's got burst off the ball. There's suddenness to his movement. I think he's probably much more of a three technique type player in even one gap fronts than he is an edge rusher. He's kind of got confined space force. There were examples where he jarred people, he shocked people with his hands because he's so quick off the ball. I think, and his frame is kind of smaller and condensed as opposed to long. Normally, you like more length on the edge. Now, again, there's always exceptions. And his short shuttle time, though, was off the charts. I mean, it was ridiculous. But I think he's going to be a really intriguing player. I could see a team drafting him because, first of all, the measurables are great, and there's a certain sudden quickness to him that you obviously love. So, it's going to be really interesting to me to see who drafts them and how they want to use them.
Sounds like a second-round pick of the Cleveland Browns to me, with all the analytics and then the one gap Jim Schwartz system.
Is great point, because he's that guy. I mean, in some ways, he's almost like Brandon Graham. He might have a little more juice than Graham.
Interesting player. All right.
Who do you got?
How about Felix? Is it Anadiki Uzoma?
Uzama, yeah.
Uzama? Is he related to the tight end from the Jets?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, no, but this kid, CJ, this kid's got 3 names instead of 2. But this kid's from Kansas State, Greg. What do you think of him?
Yeah, I watched him as well. I think when you watch his tape, you see all the athletic and physical traits you look for, as an edge rusher. But his 2022 tape did not reflect that, and I came away feeling like he was a little bit of an enigma. You see the traits, the plays are there, which means, to use the term that I hear, scouts use all the time, and even coaches, that it's in his body. He can do it, but he just didn't do it enough. I mean, there were reps in where he just looked like a really high level edge pass rusher with quickness and burst off the ball, flexibility to bend the edge. I mean, he just looked like that guy. But in many ways, Kansas State was like Iowa State with Will McDonald. They played a high percentage of 3-man front defense, and a lot of times he lined up inside the offensive tackle, which he's not going to do in the NFL. He's going to be an edge player. So ultimately, that's what he is. If you draft him, he's an edge player. He's got pretty good arm length. I think you're going to have to teach him some things of how to rush. How to use his hands, how to put moves together, how to counter. All this to maximize his pass rush traits. He was not really an impactful, disruptive player on a consistent basis, but it is there on tape.
Interesting. All right. Let's finish this off with Keon White from Georgia Tech, edge rusher. Yeah.
He's an interesting player simply because of his size. I mean, he's 6'5", 285. Okay. And that's big. We always talk about these edge rushers. Now it seems like they're all 240, 245, but you're dealing with a powerfully built human being here. I mean, this guy plays with strength. He plays with leverage. He plays with power. He's got active, violent hands. He's got a strong lower half. He can displace offensive linemen. So that's what his game is built on. He's not an athletic, twitchy, sudden guy. And he's very, very raw and unrefined as a pass rusher, especially from the outside, where he literally just rushed speed to power because he's a big man. he didn't have any counters. He's much more effective working inside against guards and centers. It'll be interesting to see, what he can become. Right now, there's 2 NFL players I thought of watching him. One was Danico Autry, who's kind of an inside-outside guy and has had a really nice career with the Colts and Titans. And the other guy, if you absolutely love Keion White, okay, for those that love him and think he can become an edge player down the road, and that's what he could be, and you think, hey, this guy could really, really be good, I think he would have to be like a Cam Jordan, because Cam Jordan is not a bendy, flexible, motorcycle lean guy. He's really a power edge rusher, and he's obviously great at it because he's got like 115 career sacks in the NFL. But that's the kind of player Keion White, to me, would have to be if you love him and think that he can develop that way.
Couple notes on Keion White. He was invited to the draft, which would tell you he's got to be in the conversation to go in the first round. The league doesn't invite you unless they think you have a chance to go in the first round. And 2, he actually is a transfer. He's older. He's 24 from Old Dominion.
Yeah.
ODU.
He spent his first 3 seasons at Old Dominion, where he began his career as a tight end.
There you go.
Wow. Isn't that where Travis Fulgham went?
That's right.
ODU. How about that? There's somebody else in the league from ODU. I forget. Isn't that also where Ben DiNucci went, or is that James Madison? I always get those 2 confused.
JMU, I think, was Ben Dominic DiNucci. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Greg, we've gone through a ton of prospects with you throughout this process. The draft is next Thursday.
And there's so many more, it's ridiculous.
We probably barely For example, this is supposedly a phenomenal tight end draft, and I don't even think we really discussed tight ends with you.
I got to tell you, Geoff, you'll appreciate this. I watched
Bretton Strange.
Yeah, I love Bretton Strange. I love Bretton Strange. Who his athletic measurables are almost exactly like coming out?
Who?
George Kittle.
Wow, that's pretty impressive.
He is a big time blocker, Bretton Strange, and he's got some juice to him. I really like Bretton Strange a lot, and I didn't really know much about him. And he was a 4-star. I mean, it's not like he was, not a guy that people are interested in having. He was a 4-star out of West Virginia. I really liked his tape a lot. I think there's, and obviously he didn't get thrown the ball a lot, but I think that there's something there. There's a lot there to Bretton Strange.
Yeah, there's a couple of Penn State's got 2 other tight ends who I think we'll be talking about maybe next year or the year after down the road. And that's another thing. They were rotating tight ends in there. He may not have even had the most touchdowns for a Penn State tight end just because they rotated guys in. But in general, did tight ends jump out at you when you were watching them this draft?
Yeah, there's a bunch. I don't think there's that one guy. They're different. Like, I think Dalton Kincaid from Utah is in terms of deployment in the NFL, is the closest to a Kelsey, because he's that kind of guy. He's like a big wideout. He moves exceptionally well. And I think he's a detached player more than an attached player, although he'll give you some effort blocking. He's not very good at it. But you can teach guys, as long as they're competitive and give effort, they can block enough in the run game. That was the case with Tony Gonzalez when he came in the league. He wasn't a very good blocker at all, because I talked to coaches, when he got to Kansas City, and he just became a try-hard blocker, and he was good enough. He's a
basketball player. Those guys don't block anybody,
Right. So Kincaid, falls into that really athletic movement tight end. But I think there's a lot of guys who have much more to them, but weren't necessarily used that way. I think Michigan tight end Schoonmaker is really an interesting guy. I mentioned Bretton Strange. Musgrave is a really interesting guy. He only played 2 games this year. I went back and looked at 2021. Trying to think of some of these other tight ends.
That's the Oregon State kid, right? Musgrave.
The South Dakota State kid. Where Goddard went. Tucker Kraft. To me, he's like a notch below Goddard, but he's a really good prospect. There's some really interesting tight ends in this draft. Like I said, you don't have that one guy where you go, wow, that guy's great. I don't think Darnell Washington's tape is really that good, but because he's a little bit of an athletic freak, he's going to get drafted high, and with the hope that he develops into what's in his body, because he's kind of an athletic freak, but he didn't play like that.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to put you on the spot one last time, then we're going to finish this off and talk to you next Thursday.
You're not going to ask who I think should be the number 1 pick in the draft.
No. No,
Okay.
the number one pick in the draft is usually based more on need, to be honest with you. Than
Well,
right,
it's going
'cause
to be a
usually
quarterback, Jeff. We know that.
Right. I just want your evaluation on who you think the best overall player in this draft is. You can
Oh,
give me
boy.
one on offense and one on defense, since it's hard to compare both.
That's
But
a hard question. That's a really, really hard
Who are your
question.
favorite guys on tape? Who are your two
Yeah.
favorite guys on tape?
I'll tell you who I love on tape is Brian Branch, from
Yeah.
Alabama. Absolutely love him. Now he's not going to be a top 5 or top 10
Yeah.
pick, but I think he's going to be a really good pro. I just think he knows how to play. You know, I don't usually like to talk in these cliches, but sometimes it just makes sense. The guy knows how to play football and he plays it at a really high level. You know, is he the best athlete in the draft? Absolutely not. But he's a really, really good football player. All right, offensively, God, who do I love on offense?
who's the best player on offense in this draft?
You know, let's put aside the quarterbacks for a sec because
Sure.
yeah, I probably have to say it's Bijan Robinson, but again, he's not going to get drafted in the top 3.
Of
But
course.
but I think to me, he's almost a player without a weakness.
Right. Right.
Now,
And go ahead.
is he a burner like Saquon was? No, but I think that he's a much better sustaining, you know, the kind of runs that I think in the NFL are more important. You know, to me, the NFL run game is much more about being able to navigate confined space and generate hard yards. What did we talk about for years with Miles Sanders? Not that I'm putting him in the Bijan Robinson category, just trying to make a point. What do we talk about for years with Miles Sanders? Yeah, he came in the league. The guy could run. The guy was explosive, but you know, he didn't get hard yards early in his career, correct?
Yep.
Correct.
What did he do the last 2 years where we all said that he improved dramatically? He started to get hard yards.
Yep.
Tough yards.
That's kind of what the NFL is.
30 yards. Yeah.
You know, and you know, as explosive as Barkley is, and when he came out, there may not have been as explosive a back in recent memory as Saquon, but I never felt that he was that kind of runner, and I think it's kind of played out in the NFL. He's not really a sustaining, grinding, hard yards runner. He'll break one, and when he does, man, it looks super pretty.
Right.
But he's not really that guy.
And based on our edge rusher episode that we did with you a few weeks back, is Jalen Carter, not edge rusher, but lineman? We did edge and inside. Is Jalen Carter the best defensive player in this draft in your mind?
Well, I mentioned Branch. They obviously play different positions.
Yeah.
You know, Carter, ability-wise, has everything you would want. Everything you would want. You know, again, we're not talking about the other issues because we have no idea what that means. Normally, talent wins out over temperament. Normally, teams take a guy, you know, depending on their locker room, that they feel they can rein in. You know, we'll see how that all plays out. I mean, he's a really, really good prospect. He probably doesn't have a true, when I say weakness, if a coach was sitting here, they'd say, I've got to work on these 5 things. We know that. Coaches always say that. I mean, I had a great conversation with a coach over the weekend talking about certain players, and even the really good ones. He was talking about some guys in the league who are all pros, and he was even saying, hey, this is something that we can constantly work on. So coaches always think like that. So I'm sure a coach would say that, hey, this is what he's got to be better at. But I think from a 30,000-foot view, Jalen Carter probably doesn't have a true weakness where you'd say that's going to prevent him from being a good player.
Gotcha. Awesome. Greg, great stuff as always. We have you with us next week as part of our draft coverage. Look forward to that. And then the last...
I mean, am I got to be with Caplan again?
Unfortunately. But, you know, you and I can be a buffer for each other with Adam, so that'll work. And then our last episode of the Intel with Greg Cosell, and man, did this seemingly fly by, will be the following week, Wednesday, May 3rd, where we'll recap everything. Eagles pick, some of the top 10, anything crazy that happened.
That'd be great.
Awesome.
That'd be great.
That'll be a lot of fun because I could see this draft, Geoff, being all over the place.
I agree with you. 100%.
I mean, I think there'll be players taken in the first round. You know, maybe not in the top 5, but we'll say, wow. And then there'll be guys who don't make the first round where we'll go, I can't believe that guy wasn't in the first round.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those drafts.
Sure.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. All right. You've been watching The Intel with Greg Cosell. I'm Geoff Mosher alongside Adam Caplan, of course, joined, as always, by Greg Cosell. Catch you on the next one.